This is what avoidants feel at 2 a.m. after losing the super empath. It's 2 a.m. The world is quiet, but their mind is loud. The avoidant is lying in bed, scrolling through an old photo album, rereading texts they never replied to, hovering over your contact, but never pressing send. They once told themselves, I just need space. But now, all they feel is emptiness. They lost you. The one who understood them without needing words. The one who offered love without pressure. The one who saw through the armor and chose to love the soul beneath it. You weren't just kind, you were wise. You saw the way they flinched at closeness. You gave patience. You gave grace. You gave everything until giving became exhaustion. And when you finally walked away, they mistook your silence for peace. They didn't know it was self-respect. At 2 a.m., the avoidant doesn't miss the version of you who chased. They miss the one who stopped. They miss the calm of being understood, the safety of your emotional intelligence. They realize, too late, that the super empath isn't someone you replace. You either rise to meet their depth or you lose them. So what do avoidants feel at 2 a.m.? Regret. Not for what they did, but for what they were too afraid to do. To open up, to say, I love you, when it counted. To choose healing over hiding. And by the time they realize they lost real love, the kind people spend lifetimes searching for, you're already gone. Not out of bitterness, but because even empaths have limits. And yours was the moment you realized you don't have to shrink to be loved. At 2 a.m., when the distractions are gone and the world is still, the avoidant finally feels what they've been running from. All day, they've been able to keep their mind occupied, work, social media, surface-level conversations. But now, in the silence of the night, regret creeps in like an unwelcome guest. And it's not just a passing thought, it's a full body ache. They think about the one person who saw past the far aid. The person who didn't try to change them, but rather gently held space for their complicated emotions. The super empath, that rare kind of individual who doesn't just listen, they hear, they feel, and they understand on a level most people never reach. Avoidants often pride themselves on being independent, on needing no one. But that independence is usually a defense. A survival tactic learned after years of associating closeness with danger. When someone finally breaks through those defenses, it's disarming, it's confusing, it feels too good to be true, so they push it away. They convince themselves the closeness is suffocating, the emotional transparency is too intense, the love is too available, they crave freedom, but what they're really running from is the vulnerability that freedom requires. And the super empath, they understand this dance. At first, they step back when asked. They give space. They regulate themselves so they don't overwhelm. They choose softness when most would react with force. But over time, that kind of emotional generosity, constantly attuning to someone who's terrified of being seen, becomes exhausting. Still, they hold on longer than most because they believe in the potential they see behind the avoidance walls. They're not naive, they're just hopeful. And when they finally leave, it's not impulsive. It's the final decision of someone who waited longer than they should have, someone who gave everything and realized it was never going to be enough for someone who didn't want to be met halfway. At 2 a.m., that realization hits the avoidant like a cold wave. They don't miss the drama. They don't miss the conversations they avoided. They miss the feeling of being seen, of being accepted in their most raw form. They remember the texts they left on read, the calls they avoided, the invitations they declined. At the time, they thought they were preserving themselves. But now, they see they were just protecting a fear that cost them someone irreplaceable. There's a weight that comes with knowing someone loved you so deeply and you couldn't receive it. And that weight doesn't disappear. It lingers in the quiet moments, in old songs, in familiar scents, in dreams where they almost say what they never had the courage to say out loud. It's not just regret for the relationship lost. It's regret for the version of themselves they never allowed to emerge, the one that could have met that love with equal depth. The super empath is the kind of person who loves in a way that feels like home. They don't need grand declarations or constant reassurances because their presence alone is steady, calm, and unwavering. They sense what others feel even before it's spoken, and they hold space in a way that makes emotional chaos feel safe. When they love someone, especially an avoidant, they do so with an open heart and an extraordinary amount of patience. They understand that not everyone expresses love the same way, and they don't punish people for their wounds. In fact, they try to understand those wounds and meet them with compassion rather than judgment. When the avoidant starts pulling away, the empath doesn't chase immediately. They pause, they observe, they ask questions that are gentle, not invasive. They offer connection, but never force it. They do this not because they lack boundaries, but because they recognize the fear behind avoidance, the fear of being vulnerable, of being hurt, of being consumed by someone else's expectations. The super empath meets that fear with softness, believing that with time and consistency, trust will grow. They adapt, they self-regulate, they hold back their own needs just enough to make space for the other person's healing process. But there is a hidden cost to this kind of emotional labor. As the empath continues to give, understanding silences, decoding mixed signals, managing their own feelings while making room for the avoidance discomfort, they start to chip away at themselves. They begin to question whether their needs are too much, whether their desire for emotional intimacy is somehow a burden. They silence parts of themselves to keep the peace, hoping that eventually the avoidant will feel safe enough to meet them in the middle. But that moment rarely comes. Empaths are strong, but they are not infinite. There comes a point where the emotional scale becomes too unbalanced to ignore. They begin to feel alone in the relationship, even when they're not physically alone. They feel emotionally starved, pouring love into someone who isn't ready to receive it, let alone reciprocate it. That emptiness starts to outweigh the connection they once held so dearly. And that's when the shift happens. The empath stops over-functioning. They stop reaching out. They stop making excuses for behavior that never changes. Walking away is not an act of anger for them. It's a painful reclaiming of self. It's a decision that comes only after they've tried everything. They don't leave hoping the avoidant will chase them. They leave because they finally understand that love should not feel like a constant emotional negotiation. Even the most intuitive, loving person has a threshold, and once it's crossed, they don't burn bridges. They simply walk away with quiet finality. The empath's strength lies not just in how much they can give, but in knowing when to stop giving to someone who doesn't know how to receive. Avoidants often carry a deep, hidden contradiction within them. On the surface, they appear calm, composed, even detached. They may say they value independence above all, that they prefer space, that emotional intensity feels overwhelming. But underneath that well-constructed armor lies a truth they rarely admit. Even to themselves, they crave connection just as deeply as anyone else. The problem isn't closeness, it's vulnerability. Being truly seen terrifies them, not because they don't want to be loved, but because they're afraid of what love might expose. To open up emotionally is to risk being hurt. For an avoidant, that risk feels unbearable. Somewhere in their past, whether through neglect, inconsistency, or emotional chaos, they learned that closeness can turn into pain, so they built walls. They convinced themselves that needing someone is weakness, that emotions are distractions, that being self-contained is safer than being open. But safety and fulfillment don't always live in the same space. And over time, that strategy isolates them from the very experiences that could heal them. When they meet someone like a super empath, someone who offers emotional safety, who listens without judgment, who leans in instead of pulling away, the avoidant is drawn in but also destabilized. The empath's openness shines a light on everything the avoidant keeps in the dark. Suddenly, they're faced with someone who doesn't play games, who communicates clearly, who asks for depth without demanding perfection. And this triggers something deep, a longing to be known and loved, alongside a fear that once they are truly seen, they will be rejected. Instead of leaning into the opportunity for intimacy, the avoidant often chooses control. They pull back when conversations get too real. They minimize feelings. They turn moments of closeness into reasons to retreat. This isn't because they don't care. It's because caring means being exposed, and exposure means vulnerability. Vulnerability to them feels like danger, no matter how safe the other person may be. This fear of vulnerability is what causes the most damage in their relationships. It's not the desire for space that ruins things. It's the refusal to let anyone in. It's the silence when reassurance is needed. It's the emotional shutdown when a partner reaches for connection. The avoidant may think they are preserving themselves, but what they're really doing is preventing the very thing they want: to feel emotionally bonded to someone who sees them, accepts them,